Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to Sports Spectrum. My name is Jason Romano. Great to have you on the program today. Thankful to our sponsors, Compassion International. Check them out over at compassion.com/sports spectrum. Your chance to release a child from poverty is provided by those great people with Compassion International. Check it out, compassion.com/sports spectrum, $38 a month. Consider releasing a child from poverty today. Today on the podcast, we welcome our first ever volleyball coach to the show. It's Lyndsey Oates. She is the volleyball coach at the University of Northern Colorado. She played volleyball in college at LSU. As a coach, she's a three-time Big Sky Conference Coach of the Year in 2009, 2011, and 2014. Began her coaching career at Samford University before coming to Northern Colorado. She's in her 15th year, beginning her 15th year as a coach, the head volleyball coach at Northern Colorado, and won a state high school championship in 1997 at Easton High School, also in Colorado. And Lyndsey was a lot of fun talking to her here on the podcast, just about the game of volleyball and sort of the evolution of it and the teamwork that's required in a game like volleyball. My daughter plays volleyball. I love watching her play. It's such a fun sport to watch in person, especially from people who are really good at it at a high level like Lyndsey coaches with Northern Colorado. But then we get into Lyndsey's personal journey of faith and obviously coming through college and kind of developing a faith of her own that was imparted to her from her parents growing up in Colorado. But then she had a really poignant moment with a tragedy that took place in her life. And she really had to wrestle and test this God that we trust in if he is who he says he is. So take a listen to Lyndsey Oates and her journey through volleyball, through faith, and through forgiveness here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Lyndsey, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to talk to you, Lyndsey. I love talking to coaches. We have so many different coaches from different sports that join us here on the show, and you're our first volleyball coach on the podcast, so I'm excited to chat with you about that. Let's start with volleyball, I guess, that sport. What makes it so unique, and kind of maybe where the love for the game came for you when you first started kind of picking up the idea of playing and being a part of volleyball?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about it that makes it so unique is it's six people in a really tight space in a 30 by 30 square. Yeah. So it is absolutely crucial, the team chemistry part and the connection with your teammates, with those other five people. There's no such thing as like a one-man show like you can get in some other sports where they can just carry the ball or you kind of choose who gets the ball. The other team chooses who gets the ball on your side of the net. And so it's unique in that regard. I think the other thing that I liked about it growing up, I played volleyball, basketball, and tennis were kind of my three sports that I really stuck with all the way through high school. And I liked volleyball and tennis because there wasn't contact. So being tall, volleyball and basketball were kind of the natural sports. But I like to be aggressive on the ball and not on another person. And so stay on your own side of the net. Let me be aggressive and, try and be athletic, but I didn't want to do it against another person. And so I think we hear that a lot from volleyball players as we're going through the recruiting process. If they're choosing volleyball over basketball, it's usually that physical aspect that they didn't like from basketball, that they can still be physical and athletic and play, a really intense, aggressive sport without touching somebody. So
there's so many lessons in the game too when I'm watching, and I'm watching from a guy who was a basketball, baseball, football kid growing up, and suddenly I'm thrown into this world as a volleyball dad to my daughter, and I love it. I love watching her play and compete and just working together as a team. But there's so many lessons, I think, when I'm watching a volleyball match. There's teamwork, communication, there's selflessness. What are some of the lessons that you see, and maybe they're the ones I just mentioned, but some of the lessons that you see now that you're coaching on a very high level in college with these young ladies, and some of the lessons that help them really not just in volleyball, but can help them really going forward into the rest of their lives?
Yeah, I think you touched on one of the biggest ones, and that's communication. Is as I had mentioned, it's so crucial with 6 people in a small space, that communication. So there's, we talk about the different times of communication. There should be a lot of communication before the point. And so, you're calling out what your opponent's likely to do. You're calling out your defensive scheme with hand signals. There's a lot more complexity that goes to it than probably meets the eye for a casual fan. So, just a look or a hand signal can mean a lot in volleyball. That verbal communication is just as key, that you're calling out what the opponent is likely to do. As the play goes into play, the communication becomes even more important. They're usually calling out exactly what is happening on the other side of the net from contact to contact. And then obviously the obvious one is when it comes over that you're calling mine, or that there's not a miscommunication between 2 people where you're crashing into each other, where the ball falls. And as elementary as that seems, that's just as crucial at the national team level, that communication of who's going to take the ball. And, then the other person should be saying a name and kind of what's going to happen on the next contact. And then following the play, kind of the culture of volleyball is all the cheering after each play. Yeah. At the highest levels, that when they come into the huddle, there's a lot more strategy talk and what just happened, what should happen on the next play. Why did that attack work? Why did it not? Why didn't it work? And what can we run on the next play for it to be effective? So communication is the number one thing. And there is a lot of transfer, because you'll get quiet players and they learn to not be quiet on the court, and then you'll see them come out of their shell off the court. When they find that confidence on the court, and volleyball is kind of that avenue for them to be more assertive, to use their voice in a really productive, positive way. And then once they become more comfortable with that, can use that off the floor. I would say the other piece that I've really seen at our level, at the college level, is leadership. And with those 6 people, each person plays such a specific role that all of them need to be leading in some regard. And so again, those quiet people, or the people who maybe think they're not leaders, they become a leader of their position. So whether it's the libero leading our defense, or the setter leading our offense, or the outside hitters leading our passing, or the middle blockers leading our blocking, they all have a role where they are the leader. And I like that about volleyball, that they can't just settle in and be a body out there. They really have to contribute with their voice, with their actions, because you can't hide somebody in volleyball. And so, again, that's where they learn it, is on the court. And we see a lot of transfer off the court, where they can become in a leadership role on campus, or as they graduate in the business world. And it's been fun to see that volleyball has been the avenue.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for a while now. You're beginning your 15th year as a coach. Lyndsey Oates is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. Let's learn about you a little bit more. Tell us about sort of life growing up. I know you played your college volleyball at LSU, and kind of what led to going to LSU, maybe what faith was like. Kind of give us a snapshot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Grew up in Easton, Colorado, a small town about an hour north of Denver. And my mom was a volleyball coach, so grew up around the sport, was in the gym a lot. It was always kind of that first love as far as a sport. Dad was a farmer, mom was a kindergarten teacher and coach, and so kind of just that typical American girl growing up. And grew up going to church, grew up in a Christian family at a very young age, accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. And so faith and sports were always a part of my life. I would say the first time that they became connected was at an FCA camp in between my eighth and ninth grade years, and went to a FCA basketball camp in Minnesota and really saw that those were not separate, how sport could be a way to worship God, how it could be part of my testimony, that was my avenue for a platform to share Jesus with others. It was a way to connect. And so I've done a lot of sports ministry and got to travel the world and see how that's a common language, that volleyball or any sport for that matter can be a common language. And so that FCA camp was really pivotal in my faith journey, but as well, just how to use my sport and what it means to to play hard and why it's important that people are watching, that I should be playing and competing different as a Christian athlete. And so in high school, had success, and because I was at a small school, that being tall and it kind of came easy. Played club year round for volleyball, and so that's where I was recruited to LSU. As I went through the recruiting process, a lot of prayer went into that, and I would say that was the first time that I had really had to pray about a big decision. When life is so easy going through high school and your parents are so supportive and have that same faith and are guiding you each step of the way, that college decision and then leaving for college was a really pivotal point in my faith too. Being 20 hours away from home, is this going to be my faith, or is this still my parents' faith and I can hide things from them and live the way I want to live and live like my teammates were living? Because honestly, I was the only believer on the team that was really walking it out. And so it was not easy. But again, FCA was kind of my avenue that helped me through that. And there was other athletes in the same position. I would say at LSU, the biggest struggle for me was injuries. And it was one thing after another. I could never get over injuries. It was 2 knee surgeries, a dislocated elbow. It was, like I said, it was just one thing after another. And really well-intentioned Christians in my life at LSU kept saying, God can heal you. There will be a miraculous work. He's going to use you. That's going to be part of your testimony. And I really fell into that, I guess I would say, that if I was doing the right things and not sinning and, really works-based, if I was doing the right things, that God was going to heal those injuries and make me the star of the team, and that would be my testimony. And just like Paul's thorn in his side, that became my testimony, that God said, no, these injuries are going to make you dependent on me. And that became my testimony, is playing through injuries, never being the star, really having a very average career at best.
Yeah.
And I believe glorifying God in the middle of that you don't have to have a huge platform or be the best on the team to have impact. And so that was really the lesson that I learned through college. And the injuries also led me into coaching. And that's what I really believe part of God's plan was, because when you're on the sideline injured, you begin to see the game from a coach's perspective.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting, though, too, your testimony? Isn't that where I feel like, and I could be wrong on this, where God does his greatest work is in the midst of trials for just so many people, the ones that I think really cut through and relate to other people. Even in church, when I'm sitting in a pew or in a chair listening at a service, and the pastor gets real about a struggle that he's had or she's had, that's when it really cuts through, because everybody has struggles. And that's where, they say that cliche is turn our test into our testimony. But isn't that really where people kind of, I don't know, where they really just relate to what you've gone through when you have those strides? I mean, it'd be one thing to say, hey, you were the 4-time Olympic volleyball state, all these great things, and God saw me through that, and that's wonderful. But in fact, we just had on Kyle Snyder, who's an Olympic wrestler and won the gold medal, and he's really not faced any trials in his life. And it was fascinating to talk to him, and he's still struggling, or he still has things that he goes through on a regular basis, but he's basically won on every level and is still right now the elite top wrestler in the United States, if not the world. So isn't that, though, where people really kind of cut through and relate more, is when you share your struggles and you share your trials?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's our human nature to not want to struggle. And so you just pray to get out of that struggle when God's going, no, I love it, right where you're at in the midst of the struggle, because that's where you can relate to other people. It's exactly right. More people have been in struggle than have been at the top of their game. And so, already playing Division I volleyball, there was a built-in platform. So a little bit of struggle at that level was not too much to handle, and especially in hindsight. When you're in the middle of it, you're certainly praying to get out of that and be healthy and those types of things. But absolutely, the impactful conversations I had during my college career were the ones I could relate to. So it was other athletes going through trials. It was other high school athletes who were trying to make it to that next level and were struggling. It was my roommate who then, also had a injury, and at that point was broken enough to where I led her to Christ in our dorm room one night. I mean, those were the impactful conversations, and it was out of my struggle, not out of success.
Right. And I know the struggles for you, I should say struggles, but the trials continued in a lot of ways, as we were talking before the interview, about a poignant moment in your life after you graduated from college in 2002 with your father. Can you share a little bit about what happened there and sort of working through that and working through your faith through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated in May of 2002 and went right into coaching. And so I was an assistant at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. Yep. So still far away from home in Colorado. And in the middle of our season, October, I got a phone call coming home. We were on the bus coming home from a match that my father was in a fatal car accident. He did survive for 48 hours following the car accident, but was never conscious. And so talk about rock your world. From I had just been home a week before for just a quick visit for a friend's wedding. And so I'd just been with him a week before in Colorado. And then you get a phone call that he's 51 years old and was killed in that car accident. So a true test of your faith, for sure. Do I really believe what I say I believe? Is God really good, even when you face such a tragedy as losing a parent? And the resounding answer was yes. Like, I really do believe God is a good God and that God had a higher purpose, and we may not know it on this side of heaven. But we did see some evidence of it, that at his funeral, I mean, it was such a testimony to his life as a believer and the impact that he had on people, that there were people that either grew in their faith or came to know Jesus for the first time through the message at his funeral. Some really important relationships were reconciled within our church family, within some family friendships, through that as well. And I would say the biggest testimony for me was watching my mom handle the whole situation. So it wasn't a drunk driving accident at the time, but the driver had 3 DUIs before the accident. And so, and it was a reckless driving incident. So something that could have been avoided, and is, really frustrating when you are on our side of it. And to see her handle it with such grace and forgiveness that within 3 days of the accident, the driver of that vehicle was sitting in our living room with my brother and I and my mom. And she prayed with him. She told him how we forgive him, that we are not angry, that we are, that we love Jesus, and that's why we can extend forgiveness. And so to see her strength just solidified my own faith to go, yeah, this is real. This is not something that my parents put on to have me have good values and morals. And it's just something we do on Sunday mornings. It was very genuine, and it solidified in me even more that, man, I hope I can have that kind of strength that my mother had in that moment. So to just watch her was unbelievable. And to just see a faith community surround you and support you too. It really showed how the importance of church, and that it's not a building, it's a people group that is there for each other. And so really impactful point in my faith journey was right after I'd graduated from college there at age 22.
Were you able to forgive? And I say that because what you just described was powerful. I've written a book on forgiveness, so I know about forgiveness and how hard it can be. You mentioned your mom and what an inspiration she was, but what about for you in walking through that? I always call it a process, walking through that process of forgiveness.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I think some of that is a little bit of a personality thing. I'm not one to be angry about things in general. And so I wouldn't say I ever went to that stage where I had a hard time forgiving. Like I said, I think that's just a personality thing. But yeah, immediately you just knew that was God's plan, that whether it was him walking across the street or a heart attack or a car accident, or God knows our days are numbered, and that was his day to go was October 12th, 2002. And so that's just how God brought him home. And I just accepted that as a piece of it, that it wasn't me versus that driver. It was God's plan, and that driver just happened to be a piece of the story and hopefully was impacted. We'll never know maybe the impact that it had on his life, but we hope it was for the better. We haven't had any interaction with him since that day. But, you hope and pray that it really did have an eternal impact on him as well. And so, I would say the same for my brother as well, that I think everyone involved was able to understand and forgive fairly quickly.
That's powerful stuff here with Lyndsey Oates on the Sports Spectrum podcast, University of Northern Colorado volleyball coach. Let's talk about coaching for a little bit and your faith, because whenever I talk to coaches who have a faith in Christ, I always like to ask them how they incorporate their faith into the way they coach. Obviously, there are lines, I guess, that you have to watch, and you can't necessarily, your job is to be a volleyball coach. Your job is not to be a pastor or a preacher, although those things might come into play. So share a little bit about how your faith plays a role in the way that you coach your girls.
Yeah, as you said, I was just hearing Dabo Sweeney say it this morning. My job's to win games, and that's true here too. I'm at a public school. My volleyball coaching job is to win games. But then as a Christian coach, you certainly see it different. And winning games is just a piece of the puzzle, and winning's fun, and winning is showing excellence, but it is certainly just a piece. And so at a public school like I'm at, for me, it's providing opportunities for our athletes. And so whether that's chapel for home games, and, all of our athletes stay and listen to a message. And so whether they believe it or not, or whether they're, regardless of where they're at in their faith journey, 20 matches a year for home matches, they are hearing the gospel presented. And our chaplain did an awesome job. So that's a piece of it. It's, inviting them and sort of promoting any of the ministries on campus. So whether that's Athletes in Action or FCA or Campus Crusade or our local churches that are connected with our university, anything that can be speaking truth into them. And so I'll have those representatives come in and speak to our team to be able to invite them personally. I'll pass on any information. I will kind of tell my 2 cents on it as well, and what my experience has been with that ministry, if anything, just so that that's where they begin to see that it's a part of my life. And that's kind of how I present it, is this is something that is very important to me. It doesn't have to be your faith. And I don't ever want to come across pushy, but I certainly want to come across as open, that if they're struggling with something, they would text me and say, can you pray for this today? Or they would come in my office. And those are the really cool moments, is when an athlete will come into my office and say, here's what's going on. And I can pray with them right there in my office when they've initiated that moment. And so it's getting to know each athlete, to know where that line is and where they're at in their faith journey. And some, there's no spiritual conversations for an entire 4 years. You just hope seeds were planted by things that they observed and witnessed over their time here at UNC. And for others, it's, a one-on-one conversation where they are really making that step for the very first time to learn about their faith and make it become real in their life.
Last couple questions here with Lyndsey Oates. So you mentioned battles that these young ladies are facing. I'm getting there with my daughter. She's still 15, but, got many years ahead of going through the teenage years and being a young lady in the sports world. What do you think is the biggest spiritual battle that the young women that you coach and are around are facing in this day and age each day that you have to kind of work through with them? Even if they're not spiritual, like if they don't have a faith, that player, there's still a battle there that they're going through, that they work through. What do you think are some of those that you've had to kind of work through with these young ladies that you coach?
Man, there's a list of them. I think it's maybe hard to pick one of the battles that they're facing, are even way more than what I faced 20 years ago. There's social media and some of the things that have changed make it more difficult. I guess it would maybe put it into one is just, where is their identity? And so for some of them, their identity is in volleyball, and they've had a lot of success to be playing Division I volleyball, and it's in that. Some of it is in relationships. And so as they get to college, it's in a boyfriend, or it's in their friend group, or just in other people, which is really unhealthy. Some of them we see their identity is still just in their family. And so their parents have kind of run their life up to this point. And so when they get to college, it's a rude awakening to be independent and to make decisions on their own. And they really struggle with that. And some, I would say in general, it's been in their success. So whether that's academics or volleyball or whatever aspect, and they've all been the best. And so as they get to college and they're not the best anymore and they face failure, and how do they handle failure is such a big component. That resiliency will determine how successful they are at the college level. And so if their identity has been in success, it's going to get rocked when they get here to college. And so the ones who have success, the spiritual athletes, the Christian athletes who have success, their identity is found in Christ.
Right.
You see other athletes have success, at least their identity is founded in things that are controllable. And so it's in their work ethic, it's in their humility, it's in their relationships with other people and how they treat others. It's in things that they have full control over versus outcome-oriented things.
Yeah, I found identity is probably the single biggest struggle for every athlete on every level of any sport that I've talked to, male or female. It's such a difficult thing to work through. How about this last question here? One of the last questions that we ask: if you were talking to the 20 years ago version of Lyndsey Oates attending LSU, what do you think the biggest piece of advice that the Lyndsey Oates of today would give to that Lyndsey Oates from 20 years ago playing college volleyball at LSU?
That's a good, tough question. About 1,000 things that run through my head, but I think that maybe the one that's sticking out the most is just to trust God's plan. And that sounds really trite of just, we could say that every day, but you get so caught up in the day to day and what am I going to do for a living and how am I going to pass that class? And, am I going to be healthy enough to play in that next match? And just trust it. God has a much bigger plan. He knows 20 years out. He knew that I'd be sitting here having this interview with you as the head coach of Northern Colorado. I mean, just trust and take the next right step might be the kind of the action step. Trust and just do the next right thing. If I had always followed that, I think I could have avoided some heartache at points in my life. And I'm sure everybody could say that. But just trust him and do the next right thing is what I would have told myself.
So what are you learning from God now as we close? This is the last question we ask all of our guests here on the podcast. Now, you're not just a coach, you're a wife and a mom to Dylan and Riley, and you just have a lot of things going on in your life. So what is the Lord teaching you today, Lyndsey Oates, in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I love to challenge other people with that question because it tests, are you still learning and are you still a growing Christian versus a one-time saved going to heaven Christian? And I would say that what he's teaching me right now is less in the coaching world and more in the mom world. And so I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and just what seeds am I planting and what are my kids picking up from me as a mom? And do they see me as a mom first or a coach first? I would certainly hope they see me as a mom first, and that they see me totally invested in their spiritual growth, in their academic growth, in every aspect, that it would be a really well-balanced mom. And that is a struggle, let me tell you, to be excellent at all the roles that are on my plate. But maybe the most important, the most important ones I will play as wife and mother. And so are my kids picking up the right message by my actions, that they are my priority, and that, as I told the story with my mom, that I was 22 when I saw, man, her faith is real.
Yeah.
And I hope at any age or any stage that they would see that. It wouldn't have to be after a tragedy. And I certainly did with my mom as well, but that they really would see, man, her faith is real. And that's why she loves us. And that's why she can have an impact as a coach, and that those types of things, that my kids would see me as a loving mom through Christ. So
she is Lyndsey Oates, 3-time Big Sky Conference Coach of the Year, University of Northern Colorado volleyball coach. Lyndsey, thanks for being our first volleyball coach on the podcast. Hopefully we'll have more volleyball coaches on, but really appreciate you joining us and sharing your testimony and your story, and wish you nothing but the best. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And many thanks to Lyndsey Oates from Northern Colorado for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You can give her a follow on Twitter at Lyndsey Oates. It's LYNDSEYOATES. Lyndsey Oates, the Northern Colorado volleyball coach. Season getting underway in the fall, and I thought it was a perfect time to have her on the podcast and kind of talk to her about her journey of faith and certainly her journey in the volleyball world. Many thanks to her for being here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. And like I said, give her a follow on Twitter. Let her know that you heard her story here on Sports Spectrum. Thanks to Lyndsey, and thanks to Compassion International for sponsoring us here at Sports Spectrum. For $38 a month, you can release a child from poverty with food, education, medical care, and vocational training, all included in this $38 a month for you to help releasing a child from poverty. It's done all in Jesus' name. I love what Compassion stands for and what they're about. Do me a favor, check out their website, compassion.com/sportspectrum. You'll see a list of children there. Pray about it. Consider sponsoring a child and releasing them from poverty in Jesus' name. The website, compassion.com/sportspectrum. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Sponsor a child today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sports Spectrum. Check out our website, sportspectrum.com. Lots of great content there. Articles every single day on the intersection of sports and faith. We also have a daily devotional every single morning at 6 a.m. to get your day started right in the Lord. Check it out, sportspectrum.com. You can also subscribe to our quarterly magazine, 4 issues of the Sports Spectrum magazine for just $18. It's a really good deal. You also get a couple bonus issues just welcoming you into the Sports Spectrum family. You can subscribe today. Check it out, sportspectrum.com, $18. You'll love our magazine, sportspectrum.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with a brand new episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. We love you guys. Have a great rest of your day.